In the application's current state, we have these kind of gray polylines being displayed on the map after we calculate a route. But what we want is to be able to not only highlight the shortest one right when the route is calculated, but we want to be able to click the polylines and then have those be highlighted and show more information on the polyline that's selected. So the first kind of step of that is being able to actually click on the polylines. So that's what we're going to work on in this video. So to start things off, we need to open up our user list fragment and we need to implement a new interface. We're going to implement the onPolylineClickListener interface. I'm going to press Alt-Enter to implement the methods, get the onPolylineClick method, and now I'm going to attach a listener to the polyline. So I think it's in the add polylines to map method is where the polylines are added. And then, oh no, actually we don't. So actually you don't need to attach, it's easier than this. You don't have to attach the polyline listener to the polylines. All we got to do is actually attach it to the Google Map. So I'm going to go down to on resume and on map ready, sorry. On map ready. In here, where we have our Google Map, I'm going to go Google Map, set on polyline click listener, and then pass this. So that's all we got to do. Now, all the polyline clicks will be intercepted by this method down here, right here. So just to kind of make sure everything's working before we move forward, I just want to change the color of a polyline before, just to test the click is working. So I'm going to go polyline.setColor and then do context compat.getColor, get color, and then reference the context, which is get activity, and then r.color.blue1. So that blue one color is over here, you can see it. It's kind of like what a link would be colored, and then want to set the Z index of the polyline. So the Z index is where on the map the polyline is going to sit with respect to the other polylines. So if we look at the application in its current state right now, all of these will have the same Z index. So all of them just kind of look like they're blended together. But, oh, whoops, did not mean to do that. But what we want is, if we look at the finished version of the app, we want the polylines to, this is actually a bad example. Let me find a different example. We're going to calculate this trip. So here, this is a good example. So in this case, there's two polylines that are actually overlapping. So we want the Z index of the one that's selected to be displayed. If we didn't do that, we might select another map and then this would be grayed out. So it's important to change the Z index because then it tells the map what kind of the elevation of the polyline needs to be. Okay, so let's run this and take a look. There's going to be some problems with it, but I want to run it and show you the problems before we move ahead and solve them. Alright, so I'll go to the chat room. I guess I can use the mouse here. And let's see, I'll zoom in. And I want to try and select one that's going to have multiple options. So I'm going to click this one, get the trip, and there we go. So let's take a look. So this is going to be a good example. So there's two trips that are kind of have a portion that's overlapping. So it's important that we set that Z index or you'd get a grayed out portion, which you're not going to see right now because both of them are going to change color when I click them. So if I click one, that one changes blue. So that's good. But what happens when I click the other one? Then they're both blue. So this is kind of the next issue we got to deal with. We are going to need a way to keep track of the polylines and gray out the ones that aren't currently selected and make the ones blue that are selected. So basically we need a way to keep track of the polylines. We need to keep them in an array list or some other data structure like that. That way when the onPolylineClick method is triggered, we can loop through all the polylines in the array list and we can gray out the ones that aren't selected and make the one blue that is selected. Because otherwise you get what we have here, and they're both going to be blue, which is not helpful. So that's what we're going to need to do. And the best way to keep track of the polylines is actually going to be to create a new data structure to hold them, because later in the course you're going to see it's going to be more convenient for us to hold a reference to a polyline and also the directions, because a polyline doesn't hold we can't get a reference to the directions from the polyline itself. A polyline is just something that gets drawn on the map. So we need to create an object that holds a reference to the polyline and also holds a reference to the directions that it references to. and then we're going to hold a list of all those things. So that probably sounded confusing, but just stick with me here and it'll make sense towards the end. So I'm going to create a new class in the models package, and I'm going to call it Polyline Data. I can close this. And I made a gist to save time so we don't have to type this out. Here's the Polyline Data class. You can get it from this link up here. So Polyline Data, I'll just copy it in and then we can talk about it. So I'm copying that, I'm going to Android Studio, pasting that in. Whoops, you meant to paste it over there. And getting all the imports. So the Polyline Data class is going to hold a reference to a polyline and then a reference to something called a directions leg. The directions leg is what actually outlines the directions for the route itself. And it might not be apparent in this video why we're doing this, but later in the course you're going to see that it's going to be convenient to hold that reference to the directions and then hold the reference to the polyline that the directions references. So that's what we're going to do. Now we're going to create a new array list object at the top of the file, and that's going to hold all of the polyline data. So new array list, it's going to be a list of polyline data, which is the object class we just created. And what are we going to call it? We'll call it mPolylines data and do new array list. Now the first thing we need to do with our new list of polyline data is we need to add it somewhere. So we want to add it where the polylines are actually added to the map. So go add polylines to map. We're going to this method right here, and in here is where we're going to add it. So just below here where the polyline is actually added, we can do mPolylines data.add and then add that. We're going to create a new polyline data object. It's going to take a polyline, and then it's also going to take a directions leg. So root.legs 0, and there you go. So now you have a reference to the directions, and you also have a reference to the polyline. But before we actually add anything, we need to make sure that we're not adding duplicates, and if this method gets called again, we want to clear the list, so we're dealing with a fresh list. So that means if this method is called, so first of all we want to check if polylines data dot so first we want to check to make sure that the list of polylines is not empty. So polylines data dot size is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, that means in the past polylines have been added to this list. So in that case, we want to remove them from the map. So if this method add polylines to map is being called again, we don't want to add duplicate polylines. So we need to remove the old ones. So like for when we're calculating a second route, if we've already calculated one. So we can do, we want to loop through them. So for polyline, whoops, if I could spell, polyline data, mPolylines data, and then we want to do polyline data dot get polyline and then dot remove, and that's going to remove it from the Google map. And then after that we want to clear the polylines list, so clear, and then create a new equals new array list. So that's going to kind of reset everything if this method is called again, which we need to if we ever get a route. I'll do an example here. So like right here we just calculated a route. If I was to go and calculate a second route, we need to remove those old polylines from the map and basically restart, which is what's being done here. The last thing we need to do is change the color. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the file in the onPolylineClick method, and I'm going to delete everything that I typed, and now I'm going to refer back to that gist that we were looking at earlier in the video. So once again, this is the URL where you can get the code, or you can get it from the source code for the course, and I'm going to copy the onPolylineClick method. Now I'm going to go back to Android Studio, and I'm going to paste it in. I don't know why. Polylines data, did I spell that wrong? mPolylines data. Okay. So mPolylines data, what we're doing is looping through the polylines. If the polyline equals the ID of the polyline that was clicked, so we're looping through the polylines, each of these, if this polyline has the same ID of the polyline that was clicked, that means that that's the one we want to make blue. So that's what we're doing here. We're setting the Z index to 1, meaning it's going to be higher than all the other polylines, setting it to blue, and then the other ones are being set to gray, and their Z index is getting set to 0. So that's it. We are ready to test. So I'm going to run it and we'll take a look. Okay, I'm going to navigate to the chat room and open user list fragment, and let's take a look here. I'm going to click one of these, calculate the route, and there we go. So if I zoom in, now I'm going to click one of the polylines, So that one highlights, that's good. Now I'll click the other one, and you can see that the opposite one highlights. And you can also see the Z index is correct because this blue is on top of the gray and this blue down here is on top of the gray. So everything is working as we expect. There's still a few things we need to do here though. For example, if I was to calculate a second polyline, that looks good, but it would be better if when the root is calculated, number one, it zooms into the area with the shortest route. It also should highlight the route that's shortest, and it should get rid of that icon and that info window and plant a marker. So if you were to compare that with the completed version of the app right here, you can see I'll calculate a path. You can see it zooms the camera into the path, it plants a marker, tells you the trip duration, and if I click on the other ones, it changes the trip duration and all that kind of stuff. So still room for improvement, but we're on the right path.